Hello and welcome to the Draft to Digital Self-Publishing Insiders. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and I am delighted and thrilled to have with me in the virtual studio, Marta Sprout. Marta, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So I want to give people a sense of your writing background, and let's take it back to when you were first inspired to write. What's the story behind that?
Well, it depends on what it is. I have done nonfiction,
Okay.
but I needed to do something more. And how this started, my fascination with thrillers goes way back to when I was a kid.
Okay.
And I drove up to Hollywood, and I always get lost in Hollywood. And I found myself in this huge gated community. The sky was just starting to light, and I was horribly lost. Long story short, I made it to my meeting. I went home and I saw that driveway on the news where I had stopped to look at a map.
Okay.
It was the driveway of Sharon Tate.
No.
Yes.
It wasn't that, was it?
Yes.
No, really?
That day, that moment, right between when Manson's members had left and before the housekeeper had arrived.
Wow.
And I was just innocently sitting there looking at a map. I was stunned. I didn't tell anybody about this for decades because I was afraid his family members were going to come find me.
Wow.
I was just a kid. But it made me wonder what goes through the mind of someone who can do things like that.
Right.
And
right.
I think that really sowed the seeds to understanding the mind of a killer. And then books offer a way for all of us to step into the shoes of a hero to see how we would react. And I think it is a safe way to try to understand what makes those kind of people tick.
And you do that in two fascinating ways. Now, I'm excited. I know later we're going to talk about the thrillers that you write, especially the series. I'm really excited. I'm thrilled to talk about. But you just talked about a true crime, and I know that you also write true crime as well as fiction.
That's right. That's right. I am currently working. Well, I've got two facets. One is I've had the extraordinary opportunity. The FBI has offered to open their files to me if I'll tell the stories. So I have a whole series of those I'm working on.
Wow.
And I'm currently working on the murder of Chris Kyle and his friend, Chad Littlefield. And it is a co-author agreement with the Texas Ranger who investigated the case. I've actually stood on the ground at the crime scene where Chris Kyle died.
Now, Chris Kyle, for people who may not be familiar, is an American Sniper, I guess.
An American Sniper, exactly. Big book, big movie. More important than all that, he was a hero in every sense of the word, and so was his friend. And I want his friend to have his moment too, and not be put in the shadows, because he was every bit as good of a human being. They both were. And so I remember standing, this was in February, I stood on that ground, and the weight of responsibility to tell this story well and to do justice to these two people who were slaughtered weighs very heavy. And I looked at the Texas Ranger who had done the investigation, and I immediately knew what he must have felt like with carrying the responsibility of finding the killer. And we talked for some time about that. But yeah, it's both gratifying, terrifying, but important to do right.
So can I ask some of the logistics about how this book project came about? How did you meet? Like, what's the situation? How did this get started?
Well, it's interesting. With thrillers, I've had a long-standing frustration with action movies and TV shows that had female, for example, female detectives clomping into a warehouse at night in stilettos with no backup and a defensive weapon. And it's like, really? Come on. This
But
is
her hair looks good.
Yeah. So I one time was at Thriller Fest, and I had a very interesting conversation with Mike Connolly, who is very involved with LAPD. And he inspired me to get involved with law enforcement, which I did with a vengeance, both FBI as well as my local police department. And that led to other police departments. And so to answer your question, that means I am already heavily involved with law enforcement. So I go to various conventions. And
Right.
in this particular case, I went to a convention. They had a high profile case being presented. It was Chris Kyle's murder. And I had talked to the Texas Ranger because I was interested in doing some research for a completely different story. And he called me later and said, I'm really impressed. I want to talk to you about this project because I think a book needs to be written. And so he and I, over a period of time, developed a relationship and talked about how this might be done. I went to my tribe, Kevin Anderson and the group, and to talk about collaborations and how they worked and treading into that ground. And it's working out very well. So
Wow.
These things happen when you put yourself in the right place and you are ready for that opportunity. Wonderful things happen.
So it sounds to me then that as a writer, as a creative person, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that there is value in the pre-COVID world to being at in-person events like Thriller Fest, which was always in New York,
Right.
like Superstars, which has been in Colorado Springs for
Right.
the past 10 years. But prior to that, I think it was in Vegas the first time.
I think early on it was. I've always gone to the Colorado Springs ones.
So how valuable then to a writer are those? Oh, obviously, you're hanging out with the Michael Connolly, which is pretty, and yeah, his books are based
really
on
fun. When you can call a guy named Bob, and everybody else knows him as R.L. Stein. I mean, you really have to go, wow, this is amazing.
That is kind of cool.
I've gotten to know Lee Child, Steve Barry, David Morrell, John Lasqua, Sandra Brown. I mean, the list goes on. And you couldn't pick a nicer group of people.
Right.
They are so approachable. They're just regular human beings with a passion to write these stories. And they're so willing to share their experience with anybody who approaches them. I admire these people more than there are words.
Well, so it sounds like Thriller Fest was obviously a very valuable place where I mean, you share a passion with them, obviously, for those stories. So that there was an obvious connection,
right?
Which is cool. So let's. I want to get into your involvement with law enforcement. So you said Michael Connolly had recommended that you get involved. How did you get involved, and what is it that you've been doing with law enforcement?
Well, there's a couple of ways to go. If you're looking at law enforcement itself, most jurisdictions have what they call a citizens police academy. And so that's what I did. And what it is it's usually about a 10-week program, 11 weeks, somewhere around in there. And regular citizens go one night a week. It's usually free. You have to have a background check. They're a little picky about that, but you go in and then you gain access to the inside of law enforcement. So they do presentations on from the gang unit. You'll have the narcotics officers come in to do a presentation. You'll see SWAT, the bomb squad, the detectives. You'll do tours through the forensic lab and get to ask questions. There's all kinds of things that you then get to do. And then you meet all of these officers and you can develop a relationship with them. And in our area, we also have what's called the Citizens Police Academy Alumni Association. And the real value to police departments with this is they develop a bond with their community. It's called community policing. And so the organization, the alumni organization, works as a liaison between the department and civilians, both to support officers and then help that bond, keep that bond with the community. And I wound up becoming the president of the board on that association, which furthered my relationship with the police department, because I was always involved in retirement picnics, memorials, major cases that broke, all sorts of things. And I've written a lot of articles for them as well. And it's just evolved into a really solid relationship. Now, as far as the FBI, that came about through Thriller Fest, because they had a pre-fest, before the convention, they had a special talk for writers put on by the FBI in New York. And they did this because they're tired of having writers just sort of make up stuff. It makes them look kind of silly. And so they kind of want you to get some of it right, at least enough of it right that it's not embarrassing to them.
Right.
But it's good for everybody, because if you can write a story that has an edge of credibility to it, your story is better. And I take very seriously my commitment to honor the service of people that put themselves in harm's way for total strangers. And I do that by taking the time to get enough, having the patience really to get accurate information rather than just sort of making it up, so
Right.
that I can tell a very credible story. And there's a secret to this. Once you do that, you gain ideas you never would have thought about otherwise. And you can build stories with much deeper content, human value, the humanity of the story increases, and there's a crispness to the story that just screams authenticity. So you have a texture to your story that you could not get otherwise, because it's stuff you can't Google.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, I know one of the things that I know you're involved in is when you write about in your thrillers, when you write about specific procedures or even the handling of weapons.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't just studied them and learned about them, or worse, learned about them from Hollywood. You actually learned about them firsthand. You fired weapons.
Yes.
and trained personnel as well.
Oh yeah, I do. I teach at the police academy. I have spent talk about, if you really want an education on weapons, spend 3 days embedded in a SWAT team. It is really eye-opening.
Wow.
It really is. It really is. Oh my gosh, I could tell so many stories about that. But yeah, so I see cadets learning how to grapple, how to handle arms, how to do a foot chase, how to do all the things they need to do. The time I've spent with the SWAT team has been amazing. I will stand there shoulder to shoulder with them. And of course, it's like the gerbil and the giraffes, because these are huge men. Even when they take off this imposing gear, they're still huge. I've watched them. They will bench press 325 pounds. It's just stunning. But what really gets me is that these are individuals that put themselves in harm's way for total strangers. There is a camaraderie, there's no doubt. They double check, and their attention to safety is stunning. And so I get to watch them, how they handle their weapons, what they use, why they chose that weapon over another weapon.
Right.
And then what I do is I go out to the range with our range master, and I will fire the weapons that my characters use, whether it's an MP5, whether it's a 308 sniper rifle, whether it's an AK-47, which is a really heavy, heavy weapon. If you've ever picked up one, it's not one that you just easily flip around the way you'll sometimes see represented.
Unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger and you're really.
Well, yeah, the Terminator, you know, okay, fine. But it is an extraordinarily heavy weapon, and you could use it as a door ram. Seriously, it is that. It's that
wow.
heavy.
Okay. Wow.
I even had, I've got one of my resources is in border security, and does drug interdiction type things. And he built a custom-made AR-15 for me. And it's sighted in so perfectly that even at 200 yards, you know, you can hit a target that big, just knit spot on.
Wow.
It's stunning to see, because some weapons have a very strong kick. Other weapons are just breathtakingly, frighteningly accurate. Others are used defensively. And unlike Hollywood, when you use a semi-automatic pistol, it doesn't go click, click. You know, you rack the slide before you go into battle, and then you just get boom, 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 boom. You know, you don't get all these clicks and clacks, and nobody goes in to clear a room like this. It just doesn't happen, you know. And the sort of, I've actually, as a writer, had some challenges with stock photos because they want to have, especially women, going, nobody does that. I'm sorry, that doesn't happen. You never get a barrel of a gun near your head.
You may do it once.
You only do it once, and then the discussion's over. So, yeah, so it's been really interesting, and it has allowed me to, I've done a lot of ride-alongs. Most jurisdictions will allow anybody. You have to sign paperwork, but you can do a ride-along. And the thing to do is to listen. Listen to their jargon. Watch the patterns of their behavior. Try to understand it isn't just the uniforms they wear and the type of gun they use. It's their worldview, because that is a critical part of how their sense of the world has changed by what they experience day in and day out. And it will shape your stories in breathtaking ways.
Wow.
So there's in a nutshell what I do.
Cool. I am curious to explore what are some of those other things that either stock art or book covers or writers get wrong when it comes to law enforcement. It could be either, you know, the weapons or procedures.
Definitely procedures, all the above. I think that our chief of police said it best. He said, our officers are not warriors, they're guardian angels. And that is the attitude of most police officers I've met. They're there to protect the innocent, okay?
Right.
And I know that brings us into some touchy ground with current events, and I'll just say it. I have a medical background, and I knew exactly what happened in that one famous event. And it's not something that our department would ever allow. It's expressly forbidden.
Right.
But as you get in and you work with police officers or those in law enforcement, they have a rather of a mindset, and they have an amazing ability to spot danger coming.
Right.
And there are definite signs of someone who is being, that is potentially dangerous. There's different types of behaviors you watch for. There's just how an officer, if you're going to portray an officer in a story who does a traffic stop, there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. You could stop somebody for the most benign thing you can think of, the lights out on their license plate.
Right.
And you walk up to the car and you recognize the guy behind the wheel. You know he's got 4 felony warrants out on him, and he's driving on a suspended license. And oh, by the way, one of those offenses was assault against a police officer. And you see a AK, let's say you call an AR-15 in the back seat. Well, a felon can't have weapons with them. So you know, all of a sudden the stakes start piling up very quickly. And officers don't just run up to, one of the things that is typically done is officers have rules of engagement that go from the very basic, hey, how you doing? You got your license? How you doing tonight? Where are you coming from, man? You know, kind of thing, up to, sir, I need you to step out of the car. Let's talk, come over here and talk to me, to detaining someone. Sometimes people are put in handcuffs, not because they're arrested, it's just for everyone's safety, to a full-on felony assault, which is an entire different thing. But what I find is rookies will oftentimes run in and write a character that just, it's way over the top. Run in, yank a person out of a car as if it's a felony stop when it's not. Or the classic is to do an investigation with somebody that's the screaming in your face, pounding on the desk, threats. That's really not how it's done. And there's a much more subtle but very intriguing way of getting people to talk and understanding body language in real negotiations that are far more thrilling and interesting than just somebody screaming and yelling. So there's a number of things like that. Oftentimes, I see weapons are oftentimes misused, used wrongly. The classic is the Hollywood film where they never reload, but you know, you're now on shot 72, and they, you know, that's just, you know, it's 9mm pistol. Come on, man. You know, there isn't a mag big enough to do that. You know,
Can't these people count?
Yes. And then calling things by names that they wouldn't use. The thing that you put in the butt of the semi-automatic is called a magazine, not a clip. So there's a lot of jargon that people get wrong as well. So, okay. But it's interesting.
But that kicks, well, especially a reader who knows that, it may kick them out of the story. Is it possible, because there's so many misconceptions and Hollywood dominates, you know, our culture in many ways? Yeah. Is it possible that getting it right is going to kick someone out of the story? Because I go, well, that's not a magazine, that's a clip. I've seen it on every movie.
Yeah, well, not usually, because what happens is you can write a more engaging story.
Right.
And people will do things like, I've had somebody go and say, hey, you know, in her book, it said whatever. And is that possible? Oh, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. Oh, okay. Is it? One of the author quotes on Kill Notice is from a former FBI agent. And one of the things he always said was, I don't know, as a civilian, how you know what you know, but thank you. But the other thing that you really want to do, if you're going to get involved with law enforcement, don't go over the edge and try to write too much. My case in point is, if I have a story that has an IED, also known as a pipe bomb, I'm not going to tell somebody how to build a pipe bomb. I don't want that information in there. Having done training scenarios with SWAT teams and cadets and all this kind of stuff, we've done everything. Officer down, felony stops, active shooter, barricaded. Last SWAT one I did, there were bank robbers barricaded into this isolated property. The thing about doing that is it gives you a vivid sense of what they do and why they do it, but you don't want to take tactical secrets, tactical sensitive information and put it out there for general consumption. And you don't need it for a good story.
Right.
What you're trying to get is the texture, the credibility of just a hint of enough. Like, we've all heard of info dumps, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. You don't want to do it with a scene. You don't want to do it with a weapon. So I'm not going to sit there and give an entire tutorial on a particular weapon.
Right.
I'm just going to make sure it's used right.
Okay.
It sounds right. It feels right. It's used for the right purpose. And it falls in line. And if you do it well, it is so seamless. The reader doesn't even notice. And they just find the story breathtaking.
Well, the reader doesn't notice, and you alluded to this, so this is a great segue into talking about kill notice, but I'm going to read this. This is from Mitch Stern, former FBI special agent and author of the book, The Resident Agent. Kate Bowers, your main character, steps off the page into roll call and out onto the street. I'd partner with her in a minute. So to have an FBI special agent say that they would partner with Kate Bowers. So Kate Bowers is the heroine, or
Right.
hero, if you prefer.
Mhm.
Kill Notice, which is your forthcoming book. Now I've got this gorgeous, beautiful paperback, and is it Stuart Botch who did the cover?
Yes, he did a
Well,
phenomenal cover.
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this as pure pro all the way, from the content, from your insights to the beautiful cover to the praise you're getting. Tell us about Kate Bowers and this series that you're writing.
Okay. Well, as it turns out, in this time period, it's very challenging for female thriller writers. Hollywood and New York sometimes get into following a trend that was successful before,
Right.
and not being quite as open as we would like them to be to new ideas, fresh ideas. Okay. And I got a wonderful, just a phenomenal agent. I went the traditional route of traditional publishing in New York, but they were very stuck on what's called domestic thrillers. Now, if that's your thing, wonderful. Go for it. I'll cheer you on, but that's not what I write. And I was told, in fact, my agent had trouble telling me with a straight face, but he said, Marta, what they really expect of women writers is a female protagonist that's so emotionally compromised that she runs off and gets herself in grave danger. Well, I don't write that. I write, oh my gosh, how can I say this? Dave Farland says, Marty, you don't write that stuff. You write you don't write the girl on the train and the girl in the white dress and the girl in the this and that. And the other thing, he says, you write the girl who will hunt you down and destroy your life, bum bum. And that's pretty much true. And there's a point to that. I interact with women who are judges, attorneys, in law enforcement, in the military, and the strength of these individuals is breathtaking and admirable. And I don't have that put females in a box sort of thing,
Right.
Nor do I write female literature. I write deliberately for males and females, and I have a huge number of male readers, and they are equally absorbed by the book because it satisfies everything they're looking for as well. And being able to transition back and forth between those two lines and have both of those perspectives mingle, I think is very, very important. And that has been part of my goal with this series, is not to go, my agent said, Marta, I'm so sorry. If your name was George and you wore fatigues and you were 6'4", we wouldn't have this discussion. And we even talked about using a masculine pen name and that sort of stuff. And
Like M. Sprout or something. So
yeah, and the thing is, I'm not going to hide behind that.
Right.
I instead of chasing somebody's trend, I want to blaze a trail. I want to write books that that people who love traditional hardcore thrillers find fascinating, whether you're male or female. That's what I want to do. And Kate Bowers is that kind of a person. She has got tremendous depth. She is snarky as hell. And there's this inner core of justice that drives her. And she just has no tolerance for anything that doesn't meet that code. But she's a fascinating individual, conflicted, certainly. We all are at some level. And so she's a very dynamic person. And then you will see other people in the stories, very, very strong male characters. You'll sometimes see a younger character. There's one, Bobby Black is a young 16-year-old kid growing up in the worst areas of DC in there. And you will see his life in a very tragic, touching, but powerful way. And so, my agent said, Marta, you put more humanity in a thriller than I've ever seen anybody do. You don't slow down the pace. I don't know how you do that. And I said, well, I don't know either, but it's an important aspect to me of doing that.
So you were working with an agent on this, but obviously there's trend chasers, and you're not one of them. You're trendsetters. So you are taking this indie, and one of the things I'm most impressed by is, I mean, this print version, almost like an advanced version, has been out for a few months now. Right. And you have not yet launched the ebook, and you do have a plan for at least, right? Because you have hired Dave Farland is the editor that you've hired.
Yes,
work with
he's
as well.
My editor.
A brilliant editor as well, and so you're planning. What's that?
He's editor, mentor, and friend.
Of course, yeah, yes, he is. He's that to so many of us in the industry.
Exactly.
But this is coming out probably in a few months. You're taking your time. You're patient about it, and you're prepping the next book or two in the series, as I understand it. Right.
Right. I resisted the temptation to be in a hurry.
Right.
We all feel this. You finish a book, it is a huge accomplishment. Most people who want to be writers never actually get a book done.
Right.
And so that's a huge milestone, much to be cheered about and celebrated. But I'll be honest, I took a different road. And, it's just my nature, I guess, to be a trailblazer. But some people gasp when they find out I've written probably 7 to 10 books that will never see the light of day. That's how patient I was. Wow. I wanted to hone my skills to the point that they were commercially viable and where I knew I had something that really would touch people. Wow. And now what I'm doing is I'm not in a rush. But I have the second book in the series written. It's called Island of Bones. It takes place in Key West with Kate Bowers. She goes on a vacation that turns out to be anything but. And it's a massive geopolitical thriller that will blow your socks off. Anyway, there's that one. And then I am doing another one called 31 Bravo, which is a look back into her life. It's a prequel. And so that one is really fun because I'm working with an active duty Army MP and a fellow that had boots on the ground. Both of them have boots on the ground in Iraq where her experience was. And so I have an insider's view of the very base where she is going to be operating from and gains her experience from. So it's a fascinating thing. There's going to be another book. I've got some Border Patrol and Homeland Security agents lined up to help me with a new book that will be the next in the series that will deal with human trafficking. So I've got quite a few of those stacked up, ready to go. And I think the important thing for me is I want quality.
Right.
I want... you can't open a pie shop with one pie. Okay. I want to have these high quality books ready to go and then launch them and then do a big marketing plan. And I have been asked, well, why don't you have it out in digital or audio yet? And because I don't want to reinvent the wheel every time I do a launch. I want to set up a platform, if you will, where one book feeds into the next book, feeds into the next book, feeds into the next book. And then once we get that moving, as I finish books, then they will just go into the funnel to continue that.
Wow.
I have more books to write than 200 people put together could write.
That's fantastic. I have to share
a latte-driven obsession. Let's face it.
Yeah, I have to share some comments from people who are watching this live. Deb says, "Fascinating interview." Thanks, Deb. And Barbara says, just ordered Kill Notice because it is available in paperback. Blowing kisses to Barbara for that, which is great because that means, I think so. But because you already have like there's a blurb on the back of the book from the special agent that we talked about. Also one from New York Times bestseller Kevin J. Anderson that says Kill Notice resonates with Dean Koontz and John Sanford. Looming dread and sharp suspense make the prose like a Doberman at your heels, right? So you've got those, but I can imagine you're also going to have reviews on the paperback version by the time you do the launch for the ebook and or audio if that's in the plan.
And that's important to do. I gave some copies to some women in the military.
Right.
And part of my strategy is to focus on people who love thrillers, people in the military, and people in law enforcement. And they all came back and said, it's time we had a protagonist like this. Yes, finally. And it's not that I'm the only one that's written a strong female protagonist. I know many authors in New York that have done that, and I applaud them. But I'm going off in a different vein than what New York wants right now. And because the market is there. It's there, and I want to feed that market.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to share a couple more comments from folks. Lynn says, looking forward to reading them, Marta. And Barbara commented on your latte-driven obsession. Brilliant, she says. That's good. So you've got this series with Kate. You've got true crime that you're working on as well. As I understand it, so the true crime one, you're probably going to be pitching that like through your agent?
Yes. What we're going to do is probably go back to, because it will increase the sales of American Sniper. It will regenerate that.
Right.
So we're going to do, we've got a strategy for approaching New York with true crime that they love. That's still a real strong avenue for them. And I don't think they care who writes it. So we're gonna definitely go traditional with that one. And then the Ranger has also said he has several other high profile cases he wants to get in book form.
Wow, that's great partnership. I have to reiterate the popularity of true crime because I've worked in the book industry for decades.
Right.
And it was by default. I just got so used to it that you walk into a bookstore, you basically have, and I work for big box stores as well as smaller ones. But so in a big box store, you have half of the store is fiction, and all the genres broken down by thrillers, mystery, literary, romance, and sci-fi, fantasy, and then the whole rest of the other stories nonfiction, which can be travel guides, and it can be biographies, and it can be crossword puzzles, and it can be reference books for writers, and everything, right? And then obviously a kids section. But it just became a habit because when somebody walked into my bookstore and said, "Where's the nonfiction section?" instead of rolling my eyes and joking and going, "Well, it's this whole half of the store," I just brought them to the true crime section because usually when I heard that question, they were looking for true crime.
They were looking for true crime, absolutely.
And then there's true crime. That's it. That's how popular true crime was and still is in the industry.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. One other thing I wanted to mention that really helped me focus on my work is I also studied screenplays.
Really?
Yeah. And the reason was, and you think about it, in a screenplay, you can't do a bunch of explanation about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. There's
You
no,
have to
yeah, no
really
space.
get down to two senses, what you can see and what you can hear.
Okay.
There is no smell, there is no taste, there is no feel, there is no, getting in deep in the character's head. The characters on the screen have to show you.
Right.
We've all heard show, don't tell, and writers are very oftentimes like to tell a lot.
Yeah. I
It's
can
a
tell.
habit we all had to get over. So studying screenplays, even some, and I took actually 3 books and wrote screenplays from them.
What were they? Were they thrillers?
Yes, never to be published, but they were good learning experiences as part of
That's
that.
a great actor. So you took the book and so you did the screenplay based on the book just to practice. Now, was that the conciseness, the tightness of it?
And yes, and what it did is it forced me out of my comfort zone of just telling the reader what I wanted. And it forced me to learn how to show them in a way that didn't require an explanation as to what was going on.
Right.
Another part of this was I've studied Stephen King's work and how he sets up a scene 15 scenes earlier, a little here and then a little there and a little there. So by the time you get to that scene, you don't have to explain anything. Things just happen just like this. And the reader goes, yeah, of course, yeah, kind of thing. And so, yeah, I've studied and studied and studied. Dean Wesley Smith, Dave Farland, they can all tell you, I've been at so many of their seminars and stuff. And you never stop learning.
Right.
You never stop.
It sounds like when you were talking about screenplay and sparse writing, I couldn't help but think of writers like Elmore Leonard.
Yeah.
In terms of the sparseness, right? There's not a wasted word there, right?
Not a wasted word.
And it's such a subtle thing. Most people would never notice. They just jump in and enjoy it, right?
Right. And especially with thrillers, that is important because you have a very dynamic pace you have to keep going. And you can't just segue off into a lull.
Right.
You have to keep the pace going. And I put a lot of demands on my writing. There is a lot of humanity. There are multiple layers. There are stories within stories, and they have to read as if it's just the simplest, smoothest thing in the world. And it has to be an easy, fun ride for the reader. So that requires a lot of work behind the scenes, and being able to tighten up that writing where every single word has impact, forwards the book and the story. I use setting to develop characters, believe it or not. I make everything has a purpose. There is no extraneous comma in the entire story. And that's how you keep that pace that you want.
And there's no extraneous blowing the smoke off the end of the barrel, right?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like there are these, I think sometimes they're called reader cookies. And I've had many people say, on every single page, you grab me with something, and that's what we are all trying to do.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well, Marta, thank you so much for sharing your writing life, your insights into law enforcement. Can you please let listeners know, watchers know, where they can find out more about you and all the cool things you're doing?
Oh, sure. I have a Facebook page. Just look for Marta Sprout. Also, you can see my website on here, and you are certainly welcome to contact me at martasprout.com.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, I love teaching. I love interacting with writers. I think they're some of the coolest people on the planet. And So sure, I'd be happy to. And anybody has a question, you just let me know. I'll answer.
Awesome. Well, Marta, thank you so much again for a fascinating conversation, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Well, thank you so much, and best wishes to everybody who sees this in your writing. I'm cheering you on.
Awesome.
Thank you.